You are here for a presentation brought to you by Applied Geographics. Today we'll be talking about the statewide parcel data transformation story from the great state of North Dakota. And with that, I'm going to start to kick things off here for today. I am Aaron Doucette with AppGeo, and I will be your host for today's presentation. I'd like to make you all aware this is brought to you as part of our brand new series called the Mapping Channel. This is going to be the home for all of our video content as well as webinar presentations. You can find us at themappingchannel.com as well as the Mapping Channel on YouTube. This is a brand new initiative we are excited to launch for the new year, and we're glad to have you all a part of it. So much more to come on this, but we are excited to unveil our new channel. And just another really brief plug, today you'll be seeing a couple references to AppGeo. That is our municipal mapping platform for cities, towns, and municipalities of all sizes. We're constantly bringing new communities on board, and it's a great way to get at your parcel data, which is the topic, of course, of today's presentation. And moving on to that presentation, we are delighted to bring you two esteemed presenters. You're here today with Bob Nutsch. He is the Geospatial Program Coordinator for the state of North Dakota. He's been there for over 20 years, as far as I can tell. They haven't kicked him out yet. And he is a graduate of the University of Idaho in geology, which is great to hear. I have some background in that area myself, Bob. But we are happy to have Bill Johnson grilling him today. And he's been at this for quite a long time, as you can see, and formerly the GIO for the state of New York. And last but not least, I want to give a shout out to all of you here on the line. We have a great representation from coast to coast. These are all the states that we have in attendance today, unless a few of you snuck in last minute and I hadn't caught you. But give yourselves a pat on the back for being here and expanding your geospatial and overall knowledge. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Bill, and he is going to kick things off with our agenda.
Great. Well, thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Bob, for joining us today. And thank you to all the rest of you for joining. Just a quick preview of what we're going to do. So this is going to be a conversation that Bob and I will have that you guys get to listen in on. And it's going to cover three areas. We're going to get a little bit of background about Bob and about kind of what it was that got this parcel program off the ground. Then we want to dive in a little deeper and kind of hear about the particular challenges that made it an interesting project. And then the third part will be kind of a forward look. Now that they've got this new parcel data set, what's next? What are they going to do with it? How is it being used? And so forth. And then we're going to reserve plenty of time for your questions at the end. So we'll stick around as long as there's questions. So let's get right into it here. So Bob, again, great to have you. I've known you for a long time. I don't remember when we first met, but it's probably at least 15 years ago, something like that. So I know quite a bit about you, but I don't think the rest of our audience does. So let's maybe start with just tell us a little bit about yourself. And, for example, did you actually grow up in North Dakota?
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you, Bill, for bringing me into your little shindig here. I appreciate that. No, I actually didn't. Well, I've never grown up, but I was actually born in Idaho. I went to school there, and that's where the university studies actually took me to South Dakota and spent a fair amount of time there in the Black Hills. And then from there, went over to Colorado, worked out of there for a while. And then anyway, it was during that time frame I got married. And then for family reasons, just kind of wanted getting into a smaller area, we moved up here to North Dakota, where I've been ever since, and been very blessed to be able to work here in this state and also to work for this state. It's been a great experience.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So your title is Geospatial Program Manager. Maybe give us a little bit of more insight about what does that involve? What's a typical day for you, Bob?
Yeah. Well, first I tell people I have a staff of 3, me, myself, and I.
I love that, by the way.
And most of the time we get along just fine with each other. But anyway, I work with other state agencies, and together we manage what's called the GIS program. It's pretty original. But in all fairness, I also leverage the agency that I work for, which is the North Dakota Information Technology Department. And so there I can tap into the resources like sysadmins, DBAs, web developers, procurement, folks like that. And then within the GIS program, the cornerstone of that is what we call the GIS hub. And that's actually an infrastructure of database and web services. And primarily it was set up and still is set up to give us a method by which we can share geospatial data amongst ourselves. And then through the web services, that gives us the ability to deliver it to the public as well. So a typical day for me centers around really probably the big three things: systems, data, and coordination activities, all relating to this GIS program.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you. So let's kind of get right into the heart of this, which is about the parcel layer. A parcel layer is a really major, kind of intimidating project. But what was it? What was the spark that kind of lit that fire? What is it that you were trying to accomplish in the first instance here?
Well, I think if I go back a little bit, for those of you who know me, I have a very thick head. It takes me a while to figure things out. And the opening act for me, I think, was it was years ago. I was at NYSGIC, the National State Geographic Information Council. And I think it was in the span of just that one conference, two states talk about that in their experience, how their statewide parcel data was actually more important to them than aerial imagery. And that was a huge wake-up call for me, because it seems like imagery is always it, right? It's always our focus. And of course, elevation is becoming that way now too. But that was huge. And it was about the same time, though, working with our state geospatial committee, we were starting to hear more use cases and things that kind of revolve around property and ownership. A lot of it facilitating contacting landowners for various needs, like, hey, we need to go out in the land, sample some surface waters, or in times of, I think Minnesota at a NYSGIC conference was describing contacting owners of different flocks, right? During an outbreak of disease. And then also we discovered, especially during the oil and gas boom that we experienced, try to reduce the number of contacts, if you will, to the counties for that exact data. Try to remove some of that burden from them. But I think what really lit the fuse, and actually is what lit the funding fuse as well, is our Department of Game and Fish. They were tasked with developing, I think there's different names for it, but I like to think of it as a land posting app. And it basically allows digital posting of private lands by landowners. So it's essentially another option for posting their property. So if somebody wants to go on the property to go hunting or whatever it might be, bird watching, this plays a huge role in that. So for example, if someone drives around the countryside around here, it's common to see maybe a bright orange or a green, no hunting or trespassing sign. But if you look at it carefully near the bottom, you'll see, without permission, and here's the contact info. But anyway, in the 2021 state legislative session, a bill was passed to allow electronic posting of those private lands. And that just basically gives landowners another option for posting of their property. And what that does is it saves those landowners potentially a significant amount of time to go out, put the sign up, maintain those, purchasing of the signs, and so forth.
That's really interesting. So you had this need identified. You had your wake up call at NYSGIC, and you wanted to get going. Obviously, it was going to take a lot of resources and funding to pull this off. How did you line that up?
Again, a lot of moving pieces. A lot of people there's a lot of credit due to a lot of people. So it sort of just built up as well. Of course, we're having discussions like, okay, we think we need to do this. What approach should we take? Can we do it all ourselves? Who would be the data stewards? All sorts of wonderful questions like that. So as a little bit of a context, the program that I manage, the GIS program, we have a general funded budget line item. And so basically it's for hosting, it's for my salary, the $1 an hour and all that. But at any rate, that seemed like a natural fit. And so typically any project that has an odor of GIS, it kind of gravitates over there. And so
did you say an odor of GIS?
Perfume. Yeah, it was very aromatic.
I have never heard that before. I've been in this business a long time. That's a new one for me.
Yeah,
keep going. Sorry.
Every day, right? So anyway, during the 2017-9 budget cycle, we requested some additional funds to be added to that GIS program to build out the statewide data set. And what that data set looks like, or in general, what our goal was, is we have 53 counties, and 51 of those we would aggregate existing data. And then there was 2 counties we had identified as not yet having the parcel polygons. So that was kind of the lump sum of the project. We took an educated guess being the key word, in our budget request. We actually asked for a little over $1 million to do it. And we had some people say, oh, it's not near enough, and that's way too much. And as usual, everybody's kind of right. So it did turn out that our estimate was high. We spent less than half of that, which is a good thing. Anyway, so then in terms of getting things rolling, the game and fish department being a key stakeholder, and then also because of their connections with our association of counties, they both testified in support of this project during the budget hearings. That was huge because they have feet on the ground with their counties, and both those entities work closely with counties, so that was key. And then also key in the budget request was the support of the Natural Resources Committee. And fortunately, that person he was the chairman of that committee. He was very closely aligned with the vision of the game and fish, and he was actually a huge motivating component for the game and fish to create this land posting app.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. So you had kind of your project sponsors, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this group of stakeholders, primarily your counties, right? So let's talk about that. I mean, how did you get them all on board and agree to participate in this project?
Yeah, I think there's, as there are so many other parts of the country, there's a spirit of volunteerism, if I can use that word, if I said it right, contributing for the good of the order. And that's what we saw here across the board. And so the counties were key on that. And I would call out some key contacts being folks like the tax directors, the auditors, the recorders, their GIS folks, and their vendors. So that was a key component. Within the state, we had resources we were tapping into, things like the procurement, project management, legal, executive steering, all those sort of exciting things. Our actual project sponsor was the North Dakota Association of Counties, the same folks who provided their testimony during the hearings. And then there's so many other folks involved, but I would like to tip my hat also to like our project team members. They were state and county folks. Of course, our contractor AppGeo, I think you've heard of them. And then we also had a very stellar group of county and state people who helped us out during our QA review process.
Okay, that's really important and great to hear that. So let's kind of shift now from, you've brought us up to date, like how this project got to the starting line. Presumably you had some pretty significant challenges along the way. I guess, can you talk about that? I mean, let's start with, were there challenges in getting the counties to all agree to participate?
Yeah, there was. I think the key starting part of that was communication. So we originally shared the idea of creating a publicly shared data set back in our 2017 state users conference at a Parcel panel. And then with that, as well as we went to the legislature, we tried to keep people up to date with things like emails and updating the website and going out to different groups. And then likewise, once we got going with the project, we had a kickoff webinar emails. In one of the emails, we had a link to a survey, and it was important in that survey to try to figure out the landscape of what's out there. So we're asking things like, okay, are your parcels mapped? What's the format of the data? Frequency of updates? Do you have URLs? Can the data be publicly shared? Stuff like that. So anyway, that kind of got things going. And then, yeah, there was probably there were some bumps. I mentioned there's 2 counties that had no parcel boundary data. So we built out the parcels for that. There's still some work that needs to be done on that, but what that relies on is resources at the county. It's just like any other entity. Everybody would like to have more people, more resources, more time. And so that kind of impinges on things a bit. That for a while, there was one county that said, no, I can't share because their county commissioners want to sell the data. But they ultimately changed their mind. So that was good. I will point out, it was interesting to note that even though, as I mentioned, we reached out multiple ways during the initial outreach, there was times during our follow-up conversations, a number of folks at the counties expressed not having heard about the project at all. And it's like, whoa, where did I mess up? But it's also a recognition of, folks are so busy, it's probably triage many days. So what's this email from Bob? Delete it. So so anyway, and there's been recently a couple of counties that have had some concerns with sharing, or maybe not seeing the value of GIS. Their commissioners are saying that. So there's been some things that we'll have to pick up on that. But I think that's what I'd like to say, that the hurdles do go away, but have to be ready that another one might show up. But as a good friend of mine is fond of saying, just got to go with the flow.
Okay, good advice. So you described a pretty wide range of conditions and capabilities and what's the hot button issue in county to county around the state. So presumably you had to have a strategy that accommodated this wide range of situations county to county. How did you manage that?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussions around that. Like, there's such a variety of things out there. So I guess the first thing I'd like to do is just briefly jump into the term parcel data. And this was something I kind of had to learn too. It's like, okay, there's so many buzzwords and terms, but the 2 things, when I use the word parcel data, I'm actually referring to 2 data sets, actually, or sub data sets. One is a tax roll and the other one is a parcel boundary data. And so for tax roll for us in our state schema, we've got things, and it's the meat and potato content of the data, really. It's the fields like the PLSS, owner name, address, legal description, land use, land values, all kinds of fun stuff like that. Whereas the parcel data, the geometry, it too can include the PLSS. It also typically includes a civil township name, calculated acres. And then what we do for both of those 2 data sets, we include unique GIS IDs, which is a concatenation of the state and county FIPS, plus the county's ID for their parcel, just in case we have multiple counties that all have parcel number 55, so that way we can make it unique. And then both data sets, we also include an import date, so we can have an idea when we're last importing the data. So that's the first thing. That's our kind of a schema. The second I need to point out is it was so tempting, but we did not require submission in a specific standardized schema. We just want to get, just use as it is, just to get as much participation as possible.
Yeah, so you were trying to make it as easy as possible for counties to play ball with you.
Exactly. Just like water flows in the path of least resistance, we just want to use the data as is. We didn't want to put a bunch of extra work on the shoulders of the data providers. So what we did instead, we leaned heavily on ETL, extract, transform, load processes to deal with those variations, where we map with what's coming in to where it wants to go. And then in terms of that ETL, it's just basically, it's a fancy acronym for scripts, is we basically have 4 primary steps. First, the raw data comes in, we load it into a feature class. We then transfer that data to the statewide schema, another feature class. Then the data gets validated on a set of conditions that we've established, things like expected fields, match the county boundaries. And then what's kind of neat, can be depressing, is if the validation fails, I get an email as well as a contractor to say, hey, there's some kind of a boo-boo here in an added field, deleted field, something's gone haywire. But on the other hand, on step 4, if everything's good and it passes validation, the data gets loaded into the enterprise geo database, and a success email is sent out to the data provider, to the county.
Yeah. So what kind of volume of emails have you been getting on these QA checks?
It varies. We have, it's a great question. We have basically frequencies of uploads established with the counties. And so there's certain busy times. So that usually there's a whole herd of them coming in, near the end of the month, that type of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're now complete. You've got the data set completed statewide, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess let's just talk before we, go into the third part of this webinar. Let's talk about, you clearly learned some lessons along the way. Maybe tell us about some of those.
Sure. Probably get somebody else besides me. I think I lost part of my life. No, some of the things we discovered that vendors are very, very supportive of the project, and we really appreciate that. And they're very supportive, extremely so of their county customers, and across the board, they've been great to work with. In hindsight, we should have gotten the vendors involved sooner, just to, get contacted with them. But I will say that despite that misstep on my part, they've been very accommodating.
So Bob, just let me interrupt. So yeah. What would getting the contractors involved earlier have done for you?
I think it would have helped us give them a heads up of what we're thinking. That we've said from day 0, we don't intend to take over any work. So we tried, that was the message we tried to focus, like, it's business as usual. Instead, what we should have added to that is like, here's what we intend to do. You can upload the data, we can harvest the data, and this is a schema, and we've got, whatever, just let them know what the schema is. And so as an example, some of the vendors have even modified or created new export templates for their counties, just to help support the program.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And how many contractors are we talking about? Presumably some of the same contractors work multiple counties, true?
Yeah, right, exactly. I should have a hard number in my mind, but it's a little less than 10. I want to say it's about 9 total.
Okay, yeah. All right.
But yeah, so the other thing, lessons learned, I guess, if we did something different, the database schema is sort of a chicken and egg thing, but it would have been nice if we had the time to have defined that earlier on, because there was so many other aspects like the ETLs that depended on having it nailed down. So like, it's kind of hard to ask for the data when you don't even know what you're actually asking for. But you have to kind of balance it, right? Mm-hmm. And then another thing that this was one of these little landmines you can step on, but there's I'll loosely call it redaction. We should have asked the counties much earlier to reconfirm. We already asked them once, but to reconfirm if we can publicly share the data. It's something that we always ask for all new data.
That's a big issue for sure.
Yeah, like if somebody says, hey, here's some school districts, like, great, can we share it? Yes, I just want to check. It's common, it should be public, but just got to double check just in case there's some, sensitive information, some field or whatever. But anyway, make a long story short, when we did ask that question again, reconfirming, at about the same time we were asking that question, there was another effort at that time, unrelated, to modify our state law to expand the list of whose information is protected in open records and pertaining to personnel records. So the timing of our question wasn't great because it created quite a bit of ruckus. But anyway, I think we've navigated through most of that, and the state law has been updated, not only for the original intention that it was originally set out to do, but actually also now specifically calls out geospatial information in the text. So that's cool. And I mentioned earlier, some vendors have modified their templates. That's one of the ways they've done it. They've set up a little flag so that whoever it is in the county, they can say, yes, Sheriff Bob, he doesn't want his address and phone number listed, so they can put a little checkbox or something.
Okay, yeah, that's nice. Good. So what would you say are the kind of key success ingredients here to if you advice to somebody else doing this, what do they really need to focus on?
There's a lot of focuses. I think there's learning that there's going to be some continuous changes relating to data changes, staff turnover, technology changes. We're seeing folks moving away from files more into REST services, web-based things. But at the other hand, those sort of changes make us enhance our processes. But I would like to focus that project managers are key. And we were in the project, we're definitely blessed with two very excellent ones. One, he's with State NDIT, the same agency I work for. His name is Jake. He's not from State Farm. He's with the state. And then also Michelle from AppGeo. They both did an excellent job of tracking the work, keeping us on budget, and pushing me. That was huge.
Good. Yeah, I think we all need that push every so often here. All right, that's been great. Let's shift again here to kind of the third part of this, which is now that you've got this data, how is it being used? And so let's start with that. I got several questions in this part of the webinar, but let's start with how's it being used?
I don't like the idea of all those extra questions. Is that why there's a light bulb above my head? But yeah, I think it's going well. The original project, it came in below the state budget and on time. Basically, it was a year from one end to the other. We are now, that was for the project. Now we're 3/4 of the way through our first year of program management. And I need to also say there's probably some folks that are like, well, this sounds good, but how are you distributing it and so forth? And so I just want to say that I mentioned the enterprise geodatabase. That's where the data comes in after it's been processed. And that's where the state agencies, the GIS users can tap into the data right there. It's how we put all the rest of our data out there. But also we use ArcGIS Online, not only for the download and web services for the public, but also state agencies can tap into it. It works out really well for that. And so that's the raw data. That's been our focus. We also have the parcel viewer at the start. There was reference to AppGeo. So we use that as a viewer, but its primary role is something we identified as something that we think is important, that we need to have a communication tool where somebody can add some text, put some markup, lines, points, whatever, and then hit submit for a feedback to report.
Yeah, so you're talking about kind of a non-GIS person, right?
Right, yeah, or even a GIS person, but just, it's, you've seen it before, like there's a problem here at the section township range and it's this, like, okay, but if you have the picture, a little snapshot, that just so facilitates trying to figure out what they're saying, and you can figure it out from there.
Okay.
But yeah, in terms of what's going on, the parcel data, it's actively supporting that Game and Fish land posting app. Last year they had over 4 million, actually almost 4 million acres enrolled in that, and they're a little over 1 million so far this year. We've been hearing indirectly at times of some previously unknown use cases. So for example, collateral valuation to verify deeded acres and legal descriptions.
And what agency's doing that?
I think we might be the only state in the union that we have our own bank. And so it's actually the Bank of North Dakota.
Really?
Yeah. So things get bad, head our way. So, but yeah, that's kind of why it was stood up. It was way back in the 30s, I believe. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, so the parcel data is also being used in some public safety things, such as address verification. I mentioned at the very early on, one of the use cases was contacting landowners to get access to their lands. And somebody else from another company said they use it to decipher complicated legal descriptions. And so that's like the second time I've heard that, like people are trying to figure out what's being reported and where does that match. So that's quite interesting how these things are starting to come in.
Okay, yeah. And how about at the county level? I mean, have the counties clearly seen this as a win? I mean, is there a value add for the counties? Most of them had parcel data all along. So what's been the net benefit for them of this statewide roll-up?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. Like all of yours are. Just want to point that out. Yeah, I think generally most people are happy with it. We haven't heard of any county folks saying it's creating problems for them. There are, as I mentioned, maybe a couple of counties and their commissioners that don't yet see the value in sharing data or even in GIS for that matter. But I think some of the key folks are like the Game and Fish again, where they are receiving very positive comments from landowners across the landscape. So I think that's huge. We also received a very nice letter of appreciation from a company that assists with development projects. So this company is a very strong proponent, as you might imagine, having publicly available parcel data. The person told me that they don't even look at a county if there's not any publicly accessible parcel data. They just move on and go to the next one.
So this person actually took the time to write you a letter.
Yes. Yeah, I was like, what is this thing? It's like, oh, this is what we used to do, letters, right?
Did you like frame it and hang it in your your office?
Almost, yeah. But we have had a county say, or probably a couple, when I think about like they appreciate one of the values is being able to look around their counties, their neighbors, so if they're trying to answer a question, if they're taking a call or something. So, and I'd still like to think, I don't have any hard metrics, but I'd like to think that having this statewide where people can come here will buffer some of those requests that would otherwise go to the county.
Okay, so you've taken some work off their plate. That's great.
Yeah.
So, also at the county level, do you think your project has kind of heightened attention to the data and the maintenance of that data and the quality of that data? Have you seen like an uptick in just how good the parcel data is now as a result of this attention?
Yeah, definitely. It wasn't. I guess we didn't really imagine it at first. It was actually an unintended consequence of this project.
Okay.
I had never really thought. I mean, we're so focused on build, get it out there. We never really thought that there's an unintended consequence of this providing an opportunity to enhance the data. Maybe if there's an error, applications really exercise the data. And so the data benefits from that workout. And really it's in line when I think about it, that it's always been my experience, anytime a data set, and I suppose it would go to non-geospatial as well, but anytime a data set that's been around for years and years, and now it starts getting used in a different way, maybe by different people, chances are very good that there's going to be some issues found with that. To me, it's just a natural occurrence, and it's an opportunity for data improvement.
Yeah,
so
totally agree with that.
Yeah, and so when we in some of our outreach, some of our most recent rounds of outreach, part of that includes validation reports, like here's what we expected, here's what we got, we're seeing this. We had a number of counties say, wow, thanks. That helps us understand how we can update our data, how to improve it. And then we've had, some counties saying that, hey, I fixed all the data. I got it. But then the other one, it helps us learn too. It's like counties would say, yep, that's the way we do our data, so you might flag it as an error, but it's not. So it helps us when we're looking at a statewide thing to understand variations. So if we want to do something seamlessly, it gives us some really powerful background.
Yeah. So what about like edge match county to county? Was that an area that gave you trouble during this project and required some additional work?
No, that was an easy one. Thanks for the slow pitch there. Because like when we were doing the development of the RFP, we had to look at, given the amount of time and money we have, what things do we throw out of the basket at this time, future work. And that was one of them. It's like, that's all, and again, I lean on what I've heard people like from NYSGIC and also MAGIC, the Mid-America GIS Consortium, other states talking about, like, that sounds like a lot of work. And it is. And so we chose not to worry about edge matching at this time.
Okay, but it is a significant issue for you to to deal with going forward, I take it.
It's an unknown, and it's an unknown level of effort.
Okay.
How we look at it, because it conjures up all sorts of things. So.
Okay. All right. So where do you go from here? You've got this great asset now. It's being used. It's providing benefits. It was like, what's the forward plan? How are you going to keep momentum going on this?
Yeah, well, that's what we're wondering too. No, we're already in some very early discussions of what we want to do with the next budget cycle coming up, what those plans will look like. So it's very early on that. But I think in general, there's probably two sides of the answer to your question. The first being is the state facilitating these continued data maintenance activities at the counties, if possible. So for example, thinking that maybe some sort of a grant program, to help balance the resources out there. I'm sure you've heard me say, and whether it's yourself or whoever's listening in, that, it's sort of frustrating. The state is always say, gimme, gimme, gimme. And what do we give back? It's like, if we're saying, hey, look at all this ROI stuff the state's winning on this, it's like, well, let's share the wealth, right? So that's a real driver for me. We need to look at that. I don't have any answers yet. We're making some queries on that. I think another thing, it would be really good to have more personalized one-on-one relationships with counties. It's, again, I've heard of other states doing this and the excellent relationships that get established. You can call somebody up, and we've seen that with some of our next gen and other work already, but it'd be nice to do the same thing with this. And so at the end of the day, everyone at all levels of government, we're doing the same thing, right? We're trying to do the best we can for the taxpayers, and at the same time, try to keep the dollars, the costs down while we're doing it. So it's going to take a little bit of work, because we know that focused outreach, it can be time consuming at the start, but it would bear some really nice fruit. The second thing, of course, is infrastructure and how it's ingesting the data. I mentioned earlier, but our preferred approach is to reach out and harvest data from a URL, something that's online.
Okay. Yep.
It saves us time. It certainly saves the data provider time. They still have control of their data, but we can just, set the cycle and goes out and grabs it. And with the ETL as a general, we're learning a lot as we go, making enhancements. I almost think this is a bit like, after we've learned and adapted, it's almost like a human artificial intelligence thing.
Did you say a human artificial intelligence?
Yeah, it's sort of like,
wouldn't that just be intelligence?
Yeah, it's the human version of AI. That's what I'm trying to say.
There's an oxymoron in there somewhere, but let's keep going.
Yeah. But yeah, I think so. At this whole continual improvement, we're ending up with a more robust system.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. So, are you looking at this as a model for how to do other projects in North Dakota?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's applicable. I think there's a couple things here. We have other data sets that could be improved. I think the one that jumps out at me are city boundaries, to be sure that whatever the cities have is the same thing the state has, and of course, what the Census Bureau has. I think that's huge. So these mechanisms can be applied to that. And on the flip side, we can learn a lot from other programs. Our Next Gen 911 is a huge example of that. Another one in terms of the model is to repurpose existing state systems. And that was a huge time saver for us. We already had a lot of things in place, things like enterprise database, web services, ArcGIS Online. We use this tool called Move It, no relation to the movie or anything, but it's a file transfer tool. And so those are huge tools that we can leverage.
Yeah, great. So Bob, I just want to summarize so we can get into the Q&A here. And I'll ask you one more question, but I want to say this is really impressive to think that a GIS, state GIS office that consists of just one person, leveraging that with a lot of partnerships and a lot of collaboration and coordination, you've been able to achieve something that's a great success. And I don't wear a hat, but hats off to you for that. Yeah. So what would be your final words of wisdom to our audience? Someone thinking about doing something like this.
Yeah, if we go another 20 minutes, there's no more questions, right? No more time. So, So, no, I won't take that much time. I don't think I know that one of the key elements of getting this done, and the way we did it is we have to have a project champion, and of course the data steward. So those need to be defined. I think we lost some time on that early on, but
Yeah, you didn't name who your champion was earlier.
oh yeah, well it's basically it's our association of counties.
Okay.
Yeah, as a whole, and so some individuals in there.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. But I think even trumping that to a certain extent, and maybe the biggest extent, is having focused project managers. That this particular project, even though like working here, or say with Jake on our side, and I'm sure Michelle on your side, they're managing portfolios. They were able to focus. This was not just a well, if I have time kind of job. They were very focused. It's not a side job for them. The other thing too that became apparent is to engage with people who have skin in the game, whether the data providers themselves or the data users. They know the parcel data, the issues, the things to look for, the things to watch out for. How am I going to use this in my app? What kind of fields do I need? That type of thing.
Yep.
And then the other thing that's helped us to get to where we are now, where we're more in a maintenance phase, is that we need to make sure there's a data maintenance plan in place. And it really should just naturally proceed from the original development without interruption. So that, as an example, our contract, we utilized it to go from development to a maintenance type of thing. I think that's huge. And then the other one that we've all heard a bazillion times, but can't reiterate enough, is communicate. Connect with data providers and the vendors, so counties and their vendors. Need to have a publicly available website showing progress during the build out. We did that with like a dashboard. We have links to webinars in our current site and so forth. And then, so as a project rolls into this more of a maintenance enhancement, that website that we had during the project build out, we basically cloned it and then modified it to cover where we are now. So if somebody wants to see things like, well, what's the statewide schema look like? What are the requirements for data submission or instructions? Hey, I'd like to see the validation report for my county. That's the kind of thing I think that's really important. So there's a connection there.
Okay, great. I think it's time for us to shift into Q&A mode here. Bob, it's been great. I really appreciate your willingness to share all this great info. Aaron, do you want to queue up the questions you're seeing in the chat?
All righty, just coming back online here. We do have some questions coming in, and I want to thank our audience for, looks like just about every single person stayed from start to finish here. So I want to give you a thanks and encourage you that we still have plenty of time for questions, so you can torture Bob and a little less Bill here and ask away. We have our first one in. It's a little complex here, so bear with me. When pulling in the raw CAMA data from counties and doing ETL for data model conformance, I guess this is a two-parter. So first is to Bill. Bill, do you consider this to be the basis of a decentralized statewide data model? That's a nice callback to the series that Fox you just put together.
Actually, I do not. I consider this a great example of a federated project. Decentralized really means each of the counties would be doing their own thing. I think you would describe the before this project started state to be decentralized, where there was counties were each managing their own parcel data to meet their own requirements. So yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
Okay, and part two, this is one that's to Bob. Did you ever encounter problems with unannounced schema changes by the counties breaking your ETL in the process?
Oh, yeah, that's about 30% of my day. No, I'm just kidding. Before I answer, I'm just reflecting on Bill's answer. I totally agree with his answer, but just to reflect, the counties are still doing their own maintenance activities. We're just pulling the data in through their generosity. Just want to verify that, maybe way down the road, 20, 30 years from now, somebody might say, hey, can somebody else do this work for me? So, but anyway, but yeah, that's a great question. Do changes break things? Yes, they do. I think I was reflecting on that a little bit, that as we learn, we enhance our processes. So like, oh, well, let's don't do that again. And there are times we have, as an example, when we first rolled out, somebody would upload the data either manually like we've got, or harvesting, and we'd get the message come back, oh, failure, you lose. And so then you have to go and dig in, like, well, what caused the problem? And fortunately, leaned heavily on Russell there at AppGeo to dig into it, or somebody that's versed in the FME suite that we use. And so that was time consuming, but we started like, hey, let's start trapping those errors. And so now when we get the failure message, when something happens, we can do one of two things. One, oh, this isn't a big deal because couple new fields have been added, nothing. It's just, here's a flag, let you know there's something new, but doesn't break anything, and on it goes. So we get told that. In the event a field name gets changed or removed, then the ETL grinds to a halt, leaves the stuff that's out there already, but then it says, hey, these attributes were deleted. And then we can then discuss or ask the county, like, is this what you plan moving forward, or is this happening what you expect? And so what we do then is like, yep, that's our change to our schema. Like, oh, okay, well, we'll modify our translation tables, and away we go. So we see chunks of that coming through. I over exaggerated 30% of my time, but this morning there was several counties came through, just lickety split, no problem. Other times there's little things come through. So
okay. All right.
Well, thank you, Bob. We have a lot more questions to get to, so I want to keep on track. This one comes from Doug, and he asks, who designed the scripts or processes that integrate the 53 data sets into one data set? And could that be something that other states could copy?
Yeah, it's more of a framework, is how I see it. So like we asked early on in the surveys, like, what are your data sets look like? What do you have for fields? And then we were also receiving those data sets, and then we did the mapping of that. So like, whatever, out of X number of counties, this is what they call this. These counties call it this, these counties call it that. The values are this, that, or that. So we actually, for every county, we have like lookup tables, basically a spreadsheet that says, here's a source, here's a target. And then the FME, the ETL stuff, relies on that to say, okay, when this is coming in, this is where it goes to the state schema. So, I mean, you could always contact me and I can do a screen share or whatever and show you. But I think in terms of saying pick it and lift it and shift it someplace, probably wouldn't work because of all those variations.
What a great opportunity to learn from the mistakes, learn from the great work that our team and you have done together.
Right.
Now, here are a couple more questions. This one is, how often do you pull the data into the statewide layer? So how often is, I guess, the data aggregated up to that state level?
Yeah, that's a common question, and we have some plans to facilitate. But early on in that initial survey, actually, we asked, like, well, how often do you update your data, tax roll, parcel, and how often would you like us to update it? And if we didn't hear back, we made an educated guess based on the size, population of the county. So every county, not every, but most counties are somewhat different, monthly, quarterly, whatever. And then so we just have a scheduled task within the ETLs, and there's a couple of ways of doing that, but to either do the pull or that move it tool I referenced goes out and grabs the data, and away we go. So anyway, so it's continually updating, throughout the week, actually. But then the public facing side, we just can't like be churning the servers constantly. So on the public facing side, we basically collate all those changes and push them out on a weekly basis, so that come Monday morning, if everything goes as planned, there should be a fresh update publicly available.
So a new version every week. That's interesting.
Okay. Faster than I think some would expect. If some people, if they get it once a year, they'd be impressed.
Well, some counties are probably a yearly thing, right? So that's one of the things I envision doing. It's on the to-do list, is to create a map. We know exactly that a script has been written, but we know exactly, like, okay, this is an annual type of county, this is a monthly, and then we want to put a map out there to that effect. If it's been more than that scheduled month or more than that scheduled year.
So here's a related question when it comes to the counties and data coverage. Brian in New Jersey asks, were there any gaps in data, and are there counties that simply do not have the parcel data available?
Yeah, there are gaps in some of our tribal areas. We still have coverage, but there's some work that probably needs to be done there to validate it. I mentioned there was a couple of counties from the get-go, from the start, that did not have parcel boundaries. And then this is also this question segues into like, well, how do you do cities? So we do have gaps in our statewide coverage. I failed to say our target was rural parcels. Again, feeding that game and fish app, that's their deal. There's not too much hunting in downtown cities. So cities, if they are part of the county data set coming in, cities are included. If not, that's a gap. But we are exploring how can we address that, either through the county as we're doing it or as an individual load.
Very good. And I see one question from Lynn. Did you set up any kind of MOU, memorandum with counties where they agreed to provide these updates?
We did not. It's a great question. I think that's something that was on our radar early on. So right now, it's, as a friend of mine was fond of saying, it's a spit and a handshake. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. We have a question from Donovan in Ohio. He's interested. It sounds like Ohio is actively working on doing a similar project very soon, and they might like to be in touch to hear more about how you did it and costs. So we'd be happy to connect with you.
Absolutely.
Might be a better one to take offline so we can go into more detail. At the same time, we have a question from Christina. She says, do you have many building fields attached to the parcel layer, and how do you manage parcels with multiple buildings or perhaps outbuildings on parcels, or buildings that span multiple parcels? So is there a building component to this project at the moment?
There's a lot to that question. There has been discussions about adding some of that. Well, let me put it in some context too. I may not 100% understand your question, so if I fail, please reach out later. But there has been some thought about, as from emergency services side of the house, to have some structures in there, elevation, whatnot, or just structures in general, so that if it's a wildfire mitigation or whatever, flooding, there's some structures involved in terms of doing a query. I know there's been a number of counties, and I can think of some folks that are on the phone right now from our own state, like Bob, you really flubbed that up. But I do know there's some counties that have multiple polygons to represent, multiple structures. But in typical, what I will see in some of the rural areas, we might have the rural parcels, but then maybe like the residential inside of that. So there might be two records reflecting that. Again, I probably really butchered my answer. So if you'd like to shoot me an email, we can, go into it from there.
Very good. Well, we had some pretty comprehensive questions here. I want to make sure I got to everything, as you drummed up quite the hornet's nest. Not at all. We really appreciate all of the conversation. I feel like that's sometimes where the best content in the webinar comes to light. And you guys did a great job with all these questions. If you do have more, feel free to reach out. I'm sure we'd love to chat further on these topics. And I just want to thank both Bill, but especially Bob, for your time in putting this together with us and sharing your story with our audience.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Just for my clarification, if somebody listening in, like some of the questions, if they want to reach me, do they contact you? Or I guess I don't see on the contact my email, so they would reach out to you, and then you would.
Yeah, we can forward things along. We don't want to flood you with all of our fans. We have so many.
But the main thing is I've benefited dramatically. I've referenced a few just by hearing what other people do. And so not that we have it all figured out, but we have some ideas, and I'd be happy to share as much as possible, because at the end of the day, we might be learning from you as well. So.
Absolutely. Well, it's a team effort for sure.
Yep, that's a great attitude. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you. And we will have a recording available for all of you who want to watch the greatest replays from this on your date night later this week.
This wouldn't work for my date night. No way.
But in jest, we love when you share this out and spread it to those who maybe weren't able to make it live. So thanks again for being here, and we will be back soon with another presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.
Yeah. Bye.